Municipal Water District Special Board Meeting, May 23rd. It's now 10:10. Call this meeting to order. Mr. General Manager, do we have a quorum?
Madam President, I'll call roll call. Director Tommy Pavai.
Here.
Director Desi Alvarez.
Here.
Director Scott Houston.
Here.
Director Don Deere.
Here.
President Gloria Gray.
Here.
We
Thank
have a
you very
quorum.
Item 3 is public comment. Do we have anyone from the public who wish?
President Gray, we have not received any requests for public comment, though this meeting is being held both in person and virtually. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak in a public comment, please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. And I do not see any requests.
Thank you. Item 4, presentations. Are there any presentations?
Staff has no presentations today.
Item 5, action calendar. Can you introduce 5A, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President. This item 5A is in relation to district sponsorship request. It's important to note that we do have timeline and deadlines for approval of these, and these are being brought forward in order to meet those deadlines. So I'll introduce item 5A. It's to district sponsor requests. And for this presentation, we do have Carla Hewitt, our executive assistant.
Good morning, President Gray, directors, and everyone here today. West Basin has received 2 district sponsorship proposals for events happening in the month of June. As EJ mentioned, this presentation begins on page 3 of your agenda packet, starting with the Asian American Architects and Engineers Foundation Annual Scholarship Fundraiser to be held on Thursday, June 5th from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Metropolitan Water District facility in downtown Los Angeles. Scholarships awarded by the AAAE Foundation benefit students attending U.S. high schools, trade schools, colleges, and universities who are pursuing careers in a variety of fields associated to architecture and engineering. But some to highlight are civil engineering, structural engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, environmental engineering, geotechnical engineering, construction or construction management. Sponsorship opportunities for the annual fundraiser are listed in the staff report, and you can also see them on the screen. There are various levels beginning at $500 and going all the way up to $5,000. Page 8 of your agenda packet provides an overview of these sponsorship tiers side by side, showing what each level adds with respect to the previous one as an additional resource for you. That's okay. Also, individual tickets range from $100 to $150, depending on membership status. West Basin has not previously sponsored this event or any other AAE Foundation event, so this is the first time that we're interacting with this organization in this capacity. Further details on this event can be found on attachment A, beginning on page 6 of your agenda packet. Director Houston requests that the board consider approving sponsorship of the annual fundraiser and that it determines the appropriate sponsorship level. And to close with that item, the AAA Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing opportunities and scholarships for individuals pursuing a career in architecture, engineering, or construction. It was created in 2004 as an additional arm to the Action Association with the purpose of focusing on fundraising efforts for scholarships and to provide an overall better support for the student community. Continuing on page 3 of your staff report, we have Grayson's Awareness Outreach 26th Anniversary Achievement Awards Ceremony to be held on Sunday, June 29th from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Proud Bird Restaurant in Los Angeles. The award ceremony is an event to recognize community leaders. Page 18 of your agenda packet lists this year's honorees for your reference, and proceeds from the purchase of individual tickets for those that choose to attend like that, as well as tables, program ads, or sponsorship packages, support the organization's outreach efforts. Sponsorship packages available for the current year range from $1,250 to $2,000, and West Basin has previously sponsored this event in fiscal year 2023-2024 at the silver level. Further details on this event can be found on attachment B, beginning on page 17 of your agenda packet. And staff has included the same comparison table so you can see the difference between the levels that are proposed here. President Gray requests that the board consider approving sponsorship of this event in the amount of $1,500. Grayson's Awareness Outreach is a nonprofit community-based organization located in the city of Los Angeles, providing services to individuals recovering from substance abuse, people experiencing homelessness, and individuals and families experiencing food insecurity. Participation in outreach events provides West Basin opportunities to connect with the communities it serves, create and strengthen relationships with stakeholders, and to stay up to date with new industry trends. To go over the fiscal impact for these items, funds for the proposed sponsorships are included in the fiscal year 2024-2025 sponsorship budget in the amount of $55,000, with the current balance being $2,100 as shown on attachment C on page 21 of your agenda packet. I will now read the recommendation. Director Houston recommends that the board consider approving sponsorship of the Asian American Architects and Engineers Foundation annual sponsorship fundraiser to be held at the Metropolitan Water District on Thursday, June 5th, and that it determines the appropriate sponsorship level. Director Gray recommends that the board consider approving sponsorship of Grayson's Awareness Outreach 26th Anniversary Achievement Award Ceremony to be held at the Proudbird Restaurant in Los Angeles on Sunday, June 29, in the amount of $1,500. That concludes my presentation, and with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I was looking at our balance. Our balance is what?
$2,100.
Okay, and these requests, one is $1,500. What is the request? The other one? Director Houston made the request.
The other one, we haven't made a number.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if we approve the 1,500, we'll only have 600 left anyway, right?
That's correct.
The only request would be the 500.
I think so.
Okay, so that's the request, 500.
If I may, I'd just make
Oh,
a
yeah.
motion. Is that okay?
Oh, motion.
I mean, just seeing that, I would make a motion that we approve the recommendation of $1,500. Director Gray has put forth and $500 for the Architects and Engineers event. So I'll just make that motion.
Is there a second to the motion, please?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, can you please call the roll?
Director Tommy Favai,
Yes.
Director Desi Alvarez.
Yeah.
Director Scott Houston,
Yes.
Director Don Deere,
Yes.
President Gloria Gray.
Yes. Motion passed, thank you. Okay, next item. Information calendar, could you please introduce 6A?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President. And this item 6A, our fiscal year 2025-2026 budget workshop number 3 is the primary reason for us joining you all here today. And so I wanted to say that this item begins on packet page 22, but we'll jump to packet page 24 because that's where the presentation begins. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you very much to the board of directors. The feedback that we've been receiving through workshop number 1 and workshop number 2 has really allowed West Basin staff to go back, really look at what we've been proposing, and I think get us to a point where we're able to present to you today some scenarios as far as a budget, our expenses, our revenues, and potential rates. You can turn to the next page. Today's agenda will begin with the budget workshop schedule, as we always do. A recap with the feedback from the April 26th workshop, the CIP budget challenges and opportunities, the overview of the 5-year CIP spending, fiscal year 2025-2026 CIP budget priority projects, fiscal year 25-26 CIP other projects, And number 7, fiscal year 2025-2026 CIP funding options. The next slide. You can see here that it's May 23rd, workshop number 3. I wanted to make note that on June 5th, we will be hosting our customer and stakeholder workshop. West Basin staff has already begun promoting this event. We had the opportunity to attend the most recent West Basin Water Association. We incorporated it into our monthly presentation to the Water Association. We've also sent out multiple emails to the entire group. And this includes not just our retailers, but also stakeholders and customers. Secondly, I wanted to note that on June 6th, we've added a workshop number 4. This was at the request of the board of directors at the conclusion of workshop number 2. This is where we hope to reconcile all of the feedback that we received from the board of directors and really start to shape that final budget proposal. And last but not least, we have it to be determined the final proposal for the budget rates and charges. This is required to be completed by the end of the fiscal year, so by the end of June. We're hopeful that we can bring something forward to the board of directors at our regularly scheduled June board meeting. But if a special board meeting is needed, or if we need an additional workshop, we are happy to do that, and we will work with all of you to get that scheduled. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to hand it off to Wendy O'Kelly, our Chief Financial Officer.
Board of Directors. This morning, part of my presentation will provide you with an update for the fiscal year 25-26 proposed budget. In workshop 2, staff was asked to revisit some of the assumptions under the proposed revenue presented on the next slide, page 28 of your packet. Here, the total proposed operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year was proposed using 4 different scenarios. The revision for this proposed budget includes adjustments in the recycled water sales, and that total was adjusted to 34,988 acre feet of water, which aligns with the current demand and then our capacity as well. Potable water sales, we did get direction from the board that the estimation of 84,000 acre feet for potable, we did revise that to 80,000 acre feet. So you'll see those 2 numbers adjusted there. And then also in the grant funding category, there was $1 million that was earmarked for CIP. I removed that out of this operating budget up here, and we've moved that over to the CIP budget since it was slated for specific projects. So you'll see that reflected later on in this presentation today. And then finally, numbers did come back from my investment managers. So those investment projections that I had in workshop 2 were adjusted down to 1.1 million. And this adjustment is based on the uncertainty in market conditions. The managers felt it was best to be in the $1.1 million range. So with the 4 different scenarios that we're presenting to you for proposed revenues, the total revenue is totaled out at the bottom there. And then on the next slide, we did have some adjustments to our operating expenditures as well. The total proposed operating expenses here, I just want to highlight a few key adjustments that were made. There was a decrease from the initial budget for technical planning, which landed at $686,000. And then also in water policy and resource development, expenses were reduced by $50,000. And for public information, education, the budget was adjusted down to $836,000. And last and final, for district expenses and other categories, there was a $30,000 budget line item for real estate consultant and the building search process, which we removed from this budget category. There was a duplication, and that was just removed from board services. So the total operating expenses at this point are for proposed budget are being presented at $66.7 million.
President,
Yes.
can I ask a very brief clarifying question? And it's probably not just for me, but for anybody in the public also looking. On the water policy, resource and development, so you brought 50,000 down on that, and you brought some money down on high as well as our district expenses. Can you just briefly tell us again what that entailed? Yes.
Yes, sure. For the, if I start at the top for technical planning, and to get more into detail, I'll make sure the departments also answer, but there was several feasibility studies that were included in the original proposed from workshop number 2 at 1.86 million. So staff looked back and looked at what was and reassessed the need for fiscal year 25-26, and that number was brought down to the 686. And then also in water policy and resource development, there was a review of that urban management plan that is required. So staff looked at those numbers and kind of sharpened their tool on the numbers, and we were able to reduce that by $50,000. And then more specifically in public information and education, there were several different areas. Daryl might speak better to the specificity than I can, but there were several different areas. Some were just some overstated items in that budget area. And then I think I mentioned in the last one, district expenses and other, that was that line item for the real estate consultant for $30,000.
Daryl, if you guys looking to reduce?
Yes, for the public information and education budget, we reduced the amount of special event services because a lot of this year we didn't need to do that projected recycled water ribbon cutting events, for example. So special event services were reduced, and then the total amount for the water conservation student kits has actually come in a lot lower. We have several thousand left over from this year that we can apply to next year. Therefore, we do not have to order for next year for those supplies.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you, Madam President.
Okay, go on.
Thank you. And so our next slide, what I presented here is a consolidated look at our budget proposal for 25-26. And so this chart just takes and integrates the total revenues, breaks out the investment income and other revenues are merged into one category. Then when you go down to the operating expenditures, those are broken out into 4 different categories, including debt service as well. So you can have an overall look at our total revenues over the total expenditures. And then the next line is that net operating margin, or what we consider PAYGO, and that's the dollar amount that would be left over after operating revenues, cover operating expenditures, and the remaining balance is earmarked for CIP programs. So we'll come back to this slide after the presentation from our CIP budget. I'll be able to fill in some more of this information with the different funding options. Eric?
All right, I'd like to just clarify first that in the agenda presented a little bit earlier, it did say the 5-year CIP spending, and in fact, it's a 5-year estimate of what projects might cost in the future. So we're going to start looking at that CIP budget as it pertains to our overall budget, and we can go to the next slide. So as the board is aware, the majority of our assets and infrastructure, if not all, are related to our recycled water program. Of course, our recycled water program has many challenges and opportunities in the future, especially over this next 5 years. I don't have to remind you, but I will, of our challenging influent water quality from Hyperion that fluctuates on a fairly routine basis and takes quite a toll on the equipment that we own and operate. The age of that infrastructure, some of our facilities are original from 30 years back and do require quite a bit of TLC or R&R, which is, of course, rehabilitation and replacement spending. There are several major treatment plant assets that need to be replaced just to maintain the level of service, both quality and quantity, that we are contractually obligated to provide to some of our end users. And of course, those issues often result in unexpected shutdowns, which result in loss of production, added costs to address them in an emergency manner, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, one of our biggest challenges is that today's recycled water operations We need to position them to accommodate major possible changes associated with the pure water, recycled water programs in the region. If you recall, that would be both Los Angeles's Pure Water LA program and the Metropolitan Water District and the LA County Sanitation District's Pure Water SoCal. Not knowing exactly what our role will be at this time, because those projects are so many years off. The reason this is in the challenge category is that we still have to meet our obligations for quality and quantity today, and yet balance that against a future that may allow us to purchase a different and a higher quality water from one of those two programs. And that also makes it onto the opportunities list, which I'll come back to. But first and foremost, one of our biggest opportunities as it relates to our CIP spending in coming years is really just that new contract with Jacobs for operations and maintenance of the system. We do believe that if you recall, the structure of that contract is going to allow us to do more preventative maintenance rather than reactive maintenance. And by doing preventative maintenance ahead of failures and maintaining the equipment before it fails and causes a shutdown, we do believe that we'll be able to extend the life of some of these pieces of equipment and maybe even reduce our CIP spending overall in years to come. But that still, remains to be seen. As you're well aware, many of our recycled water customers with the refinery agreements are expiring or have expired, and we're in the process of renegotiating those. Staff has every intention of being able to recover all of the capital costs that ultimately would be spent for those specific refinery facilities that feed and specifically the boiler feed water and the nitrified water to our refinery customers. We would expect that the contracts would allow us to recover the capital costs needed to maintain those facilities in future years. As you're well aware, the cost of service analysis that was been performed this past year, commissioned by this board, allows us to really get a good view of not just our repair and CIP needs, but our entire costs associated with our recycled water program. And that's really been driving a lot of the decisions that we are making as it relates to all of these items that we're talking about in the opportunities column, as well as the challenges column. And then lastly, again, it's not just a challenge having that uncertainty with the pure water programs that are going to be happening in the years ahead. It's also a massive opportunity for West Basin. We are going to have an opportunity to partner with one or both of those two entities and see real improvements in water quality. And that, of course, eventually will reduce our overall operating costs potentially by purchasing advanced quality water rather than producing it. Now, all of this is in the context of the future years, and so, but we still have to meet our quality and quantity requirements to our existing contracts today. And so, the CIP projects list that we're going to go through and the budget you're going to see today are really trying to make sure that we continue to deliver high quality water quality and quantity to our customers so that we can continue to rely on recycled water as a local sustainable supply. And we can go on to the next slide. All right. Well, if you recall the historical guiding principles for staff previously in one of our strategic plans, we have water supply reliability. Our intention would be that the CIP program would increase the supply diversification by promoting water recycling. We do have a couple, not a lot, but a couple of additional laterals in this budget that would allow us to sell more recycled water to a couple of new customers. Of course, we're seeking financial and resource management that provides an effective overall capital facility asset management through the application of industry best practices. What this is really saying is that it's good practice to maintain your assets and infrastructure before they fail. We're maintaining facilities to manage and minimize those risks of failure and liability exposure. Again, I can't stress enough that the water quality and water quantity goals that we are either contractually obligated to achieve for our customers or even for the environmental purposes. Many of our waters have regulations surrounding them. And of course, we need to maintain and ensure that we are able to produce the water quality or maintain the regulatory requirements associated with producing a recycled water. Customer service, I've touched on that many times. And of course, just mentioned environmental stewardship as well. So again, these are focusing our decision-making processes in which projects we need to move forward, which ones are perhaps a higher priority than others. And we can go on to the next slide. As we consider the short-term investments, I'll just remind you that when the district took on the original construction of the facility in the 90s and then expanded the ECL facility 5 times or 4 times since then, and also installed the satellite facilities. Those are massive new capital investments for infrastructure. And today, we're not looking at necessarily programs to finance over 30 years because they're brand new and they'll have a 30-year life. As you'll see in these latter slides, a lot of our projects, if not majority of our projects, are for rehabilitation and replacement. We're not doing a lot of new capital investments at the facilities. And so that's partially because of that 10-year outlook. We don't know how long these facilities are going to be in place if something changes with our source water from the city of Los Angeles, or we become involved in the Pure Water Southern California project. And so we don't want to necessarily invest for 30 years if we're going to potentially strand assets in the next 10. And so it really is a balance, as you see here on the left-hand side, of investing in operational expenses in order to perhaps stave off capital. But sometimes it does make sense to invest in capital project because it will reduce your operating costs, and it may pay for itself within a 5-year window or a 10-year window. And so staff balances that with each project that ultimately comes before the board for approval, whether that's a design phase or construction phase. We also have to look at those risks, right? Again, I can't stress this enough. The risk that we cannot deliver the quality and the quantity that we are contractually obligated to, or even meet the regulatory qualities that we're required to do by law. And so as I've touched on, we balance all of these things really just today, looking at the fact that we don't necessarily, or we don't want to finance these for 30 years because we may be stranding them or not using them in the next 10. And so we're trying to come up with a CIP program that meets our needs today, our customer obligations, our regulatory obligations, but also doesn't put us in a bind because it's hugely expensive and we incur debt for several decades ahead. And so as you're going to see in the next couple of slides, really what all this means is we're targeting rehabilitation and replacement projects to keep these systems running, to keep them producing the quality and the quantities that we're obligated to do in order to really just extend the life as long as we need to before that other opportunity of a pure water program reveals itself. And we can go to the next slide. So we're going to start looking at the 5-year costs, and I would caution you that the outlook beyond this coming year is quite high. We can go to the next slide. And I don't want the board to get too hung up on that just yet. But first, we're going to talk about the projects as a whole. The entire current 5-year CIP program looks at 53 different projects or budget line items. That is really 37 of those projects will fall into this next year, which is what we're going to focus on today, is the 25-26 CIP budget. And then, of course, there's 12 others that the board can consider throughout the year, whether they want to progress or proceed with them. And of course, in the future, making up the future budget, we've got about 16 additional projects. So again, 53 in the total 5-year outlook, 37 of those will impact us in fiscal year 25-26 and impact the budget that this board is considering adopting. You can go to the next slide. So when staff estimates those costs, schedules them all out, when they will start, when they will end over the next 5 years, you have an outlook like this. You'll see a couple of very specific projects highlighted in these first 2 years. really only because those are the projects that the board is very familiar with. We've been discussing the solids handling improvement projects extensively over the last year. We've been discussing the DCS replacement project over the last several years. And of course, in just the last several months, the board has authorized a construction contract for the solids handling project. And the board has authorized the progressive design builders section for the DCS backbone. And what you're going to find is, and you can see it somewhat in this graphic for the fiscal year 25-26, those two costs alone are dominating quite a bit of the total $28 million CIP budget that we anticipate for this year. And so those are going to be real spends because those projects are underway. And we'll talk more about that later. But a couple of these other projects you may be familiar with, the Title 22 filters. We just wrapped up one set of filter rehabilitations. And if you recall staff's previous reporting, we intend to do a couple of filters a year over the next couple of years. We have something like 20, I forget the exact number of these filters, and we're just rehabilitating them, a couple at a time in order to spread that budget out as far as we can.
Eric, can I ask?
Yes, ma'am.
Several questions. Is priority considered when you look at these projects just based on the need?
I would say in this context, President Gray, priority means that we have either already incurred an obligation through a contract to do that project. The board's already approved it and it is moving forward. But in some of these cases, it is things that we need to do. So it's a little bit of both, because the need was for the reason that we needed to do these projects. And that's why at least two of them came before the board for the previous year. And ultimately, the board approved moving forward with them. We go to the next slide. These next couple slides are all very similar information. The bar charts are the same. There's nothing new information here, but we are categorizing the dollar values in the projects a little bit differently, just to give you a flavor of what we've been saying verbally, but now you can see it on the graph. And what we're really saying on this graph here is in dark blue or deep blue there, those are the rehabilitation and replacement projects that we keep pointing at. And as you can see, $26 million of that total 28 is really just investing into the system to keep it maintaining water quality and water quantity. There are a few new infrastructure projects, as I mentioned earlier, some pipeline laterals that we've got some outside funding for. That would add new customers into the system. But for the most part, this budget really looks at maintaining the assets that this board has invested in for the last 30 years. And we can go to the next slide. As I mentioned, the numbers aren't really changing on these slides, just the way that we're breaking them up. The reason that we're showing this slide here is really to show you that the funding, right? When we talk about a $28 million CIP budget, that doesn't mean to suggest that West Basin has to find $28 million. Some of that money has already been found or will be found under the new contracts. And so as an example here I guess that's a peach color in the middle there, that's what we call refinery funding. As I mentioned earlier, projects that need to be performed within the refinery facilities, within our facilities that deliver to the refinery specifically, need to be funded by the refinery. And so the way we're looking at this budget is those refineries will fund those projects through the newly negotiated contracts, which of course are still underway. But the bottom line is we cannot recover those funds from the refineries, then we're not going to do those projects. And of course, we won't obligate ourselves in the new contract to have very challenging water qualities to meet. That will be part of the negotiation. And I'm very confident that we'll be able to collect a revenue through the fixed R&R from the refineries, through the fixed rate for the refineries that will allow us to have a robust capital program specific to those refinery facilities. And really what that means, and then of course we've got some outside funding this coming year to the tune of $1.1 million. That's just contributions from either state, federal grants, other entities. And lastly, if we go to the next slide, what it really points us to is that while that previous slide might have suggested an average annual CIP cost of about $32 million, when we look at the funding that specifically West Basin needs to find outside of the refinery funding or in addition to any sort of payments that we might achieve, the average is really about $21.5 million for the projects that staff estimates we need to keep this system running. And of course, you see for next year, specifically fiscal year 25-26, that number is about $21.6 million. And so I'm going to be turning it back over, I believe, to, or actually back to staff in order to start talking about the specific projects that are included in that, not just the 21.6, but the entire $28 million fiscal year 25-26. But this just gives you the outlook of future years. And I would caution you that anything beyond 25-26 that we don't already have contracted will be looked at very closely. I'm not expecting that we're going to necessarily have a $45 million CIP budget next year, but we will, as we progress towards a better understanding of the Southern California, or excuse me, the pure water programs that are available to us, as we continue to find outside funding that becomes available for different things, we have every intention of getting our CIP needs whittled down, whether it's not necessarily from doing less projects, but perhaps from finding funding elsewhere. So I'm going to turn it over to staff to give you a focus right in on the fiscal year 25-26, but I'll take questions first.
Okay, and before you turn it over to staff, I do have a question.
Sure.
If you look at, slide 16, you're showing that there's $5.9 million for refinery funding. So I'm trying to, there's a lot of similar information, but differently presented. So if I go back to slide 14, that 5.9 million would cover which of those projects or categories, I should say?
I think that, and I'll let staff jump in and correct me if I misspeak here, but I would say that covers a portion of most of these. And so, as you recall, the refineries have what we call on-site costs, which are the facilities that are dedicated solely to them, but they also pay through that fixed payment a portion of the upstream costs that it takes to treat the water to get it to their facility, our facility, but to their specific facility. So to some extent, that refinery funding will pepper most of these categories.
Okay, so maybe a little bit more specific. When we're showing on slide 14, for example, one of the refineries is identified, and that's kind of the pinkish line, the 1.22 million Torrance refinery project.
Right.
Okay, so that would be part of that 5.9 million. Is that a proper assumption?
That's correct. And that would be exclusively from the Torrance refinery fixed payments.
So along those lines of that 5.9 million, I understand that was an easy one to highlight. It makes sense. Would most of that money cover the R&R project, or would any of that money go to the DCS project? Did we ever decide, and I forget, I know that it got back and forth.
Yes, in fact, Director, in the subsequent slides that the engineering staff will cover, we actually show, I believe, columns that include how much money is coming from the refineries today. And so there is an additional breakdown of fiscal year 26, showing line by line for the projects in the next few slides. And it will have columns that show the total project cost, the refinery contribution, any other outside funding contributions, and I think even a breakdown of our staff labor associated with it. Because remember, some of these costs of the total 28 million, about 2 million of that is just estimated staff costs.
Okay, but, so back to then slide 16, of the 21.6 million, some of that will be offset by additional contribution or nothing, because you've already identified that 5.9 million is coming from refinery and 1.1 million from other. So our hard cost, if we were to implement everything there, is 21.6 million.
That's right, yeah. And when we do look at those external funding sources like the refineries or like grants, what's left over for West Basin to find funding for is that 21.6.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And again, staff is going to focus in on that fiscal year 25-26 in the next few slides. And we'll be able to see exactly which projects are making up each of these, as well as the funding sources associated. And so I'll hand it over to Bartek.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, Madam President, directors. As Eric mentioned, we'll dive into the next year's fiscal year 25-26 budget. And on slide 19 or packet page 42, we can break it down into multiple categories. So I'll start with the table you see before you on the left-hand side. The first column just categorizes the different projects, and we've done this historically into different types of projects, right? First, new infrastructure and pipeline projects. Think of the Palos Verdes pipeline that is wrapping up construction now. Think of the phase 2 expansion project that we did. Those are new facilities, and those types of projects, new pipelines, new facilities, would go under that category. Next up, R&R facilities. Eric mentioned quite a bit on those. We have two R&R components there. The first one is R&R facilities. Those are actual projects that have a planning, design, construction phase to them. The next one up, the third line where it says R&R capital and slash operational, those are expenditures that meet our capitalization policy, meaning if we are spending to replace a valve or a pump that is more than $10,000 that will increase the useful life of the asset, well, that's a capital expenditure. And so those are categorized under the R&R capital slash operational. And then lastly, what we call other projects. Historically, that's the category that includes capital expenditures on this building and on IT type of infrastructure. And then we go to the columns, and the first two columns, or column 2 and column 3, column 2 says priority projects, and column 3 says projects for consideration. Those two columns represent the costs that will come out of the district's coffers, district funding type of costs towards those type of projects. So under priority projects we mentioned earlier, those are type of projects that are either already ongoing, or the board provided approval for them and they're proceeding. And so you can see the total cost estimated, total district cost for those type of projects is around $17.8 million. Projects for consideration are those projects that are still in the planning phase. So we largely anticipate some staff time towards those, validating the scope, confirming whether they need to proceed. If they need to proceed, what portion needs to proceed, calculating the risk, calculating the return on investment, and coming back and presenting those type of numbers to the board to see if the board approves and agrees with those type of projects proceeding. So they're under consideration, and we anticipate $1.1 million worth of work coming in from the district's coffers towards those type of projects. And then the fourth column, projects with external funding. So the same type of projects, we wanted to highlight what dollar amounts are coming in from the refineries. And you can see the total there. Out of the 28 million that we have before you for consideration for next year, 7.5 is estimated to come from the refinery agreements. And of the 28 million, again, there's about $2.3 million of West Basin labor associated with the CIP program. That's accounted for separately in our financing and when we look at revenues, we look at expenditures. But we also report it here for the board to see the overall project costs, including West Basin labor. So as Eric mentioned, we have for next fiscal year a number of 37 projects, which shortly I'll hand over to Sen and talk a little bit more about. For a total of $28.6 million. Approximately $2 million of that is West Basin labor. So if we put that to the side, then you see the number to the right over there is $26.3 million. Out of that 26.3, if we take out what the refinery is funding, then and we take out the projects for consideration, take those two out, what's left is $17.8 million roughly of district funds that would be required for those priority type of projects that are already ongoing or board approved for us to proceed. Happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Susanna to go through those projects a little bit more detail.
Okay. Questions? Are all these columns, like priority projects, project for consideration, project with external funding, and West Basin labor, are they all exclusive? In other words, if we look at R&R facilities, is the priority projects or some of those projects also projects with external funding?
Yes.
So when we're looking at that 13.283 million, that would be the total cost without labor. But there is $6 million of external funding available.
Director Alvarez, in the next 3 slides, we've actually broken those same categories out by project. And so you'll see much more detail by project associated with the outside funding, the district funding, the labor. So I think you'll.
I know as we go along, there is some clarification, but it's just nice to just people, pull up a table and say, where is a repetition or not? And I appreciate the clarification. So when we say that there's $28 million with labor at the bottom of their total, that's adding up all the totals there, but there are some repetition, so it's not the absolute. I kind of have, like, getting down to the bottom line is how do you get from 28 to 17 billion? If I wanted to add and subtract in there.
Sure. The 17.78, let's say 17.8 million right at the bottom is equal to the total sum of the priority projects column. So that is,
So that's
the absolute minimum. If we're not spending more money on consultants for the other projects, the other types of projects, that's the absolute minimum coming in from district funds, separate from the refineries.
And we just said that projects with external funding had 6 million, and some of that goes to the priority project. And the priority projects is, I saw that, and I said, is that really that number, or is it coming from someplace else? So if I subtract out the 6 million, because it's coming from other sources, and we don't need a minimum district funds, or that's not the way
Those are added.
that's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah.
They're added.
So for the R&R facilities specific there, if you add the entire row, that would be the cost associated with that particular category of projects. And so it wouldn't be 13 million minus 6 million. It would be 13 million plus 6 million for the total project cost. But 6 million of that, let's just call it $19 million project cost, will come from external services, leaving behind that 13 million that West Basin needs to find funding for.
A little bit different than. All right, thank you. More questions.
Are we all on board? A little confusing, so,
I just
Tommy,
have one question.
sure.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed the West Basin labor. Now, is that West Basin labor our internal workforce? If it is,
It is.
it's, when it comes to like the capital projects, is the construction workforce included in the CIP side of it? So it's separate from the category of West Basin labor? Right?
Yes, yeah, the costs that you see for the program includes all types of costs, West Basin labor, consultants, vendors, construction crews, so on and so forth. We just put West Basin labor here on the side because it's accounted for separately. But we also included, we mention it because we want to see what the program as a whole costs. So that's why we have it with labor and without labor.
West Basin labor then really is you guys. Whenever you work on project X, you charge project X. That's what we're talking, is that what West Basin labor is?
Right. West Basin employees.
I mean, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you, go on.
Before we move on to the next slide, I'd just like to point out that if you sum up the totals in these rows, or excuse me, in these columns, that 17.7 million, 1.1 million, and the West Basin labor, that 2.3, you should get the $21 million from the previous slide. And the reason that we're showing you that $17 million as a bare minimum of funding is that if we, the labor's already included in the budget from the information that Wendy has presented now through workshop 1 and workshop 2. Projects for consideration have not begun yet. Those would come before the board throughout, the year as requests to hire consultants to start looking at feasibility or planning. And if we did none of that, right, then you wouldn't do the $1.1 million. And that would leave effectively that $17.8 million, which again is largely dominated by the two projects, the DCS upgrade project and the solids handling project. Those are going to be the big two spins coming this year, and they are largely the majority of the $17 million. So bear that in mind.
So if there are any questions, we'll hand it over to our engineering manager,
Questions?
Stanley.
Sure, there will be more as we go into details of the budget. So good morning, and members of the board. As Eric and Mark have just mentioned, that majority, 90% or more of the CIP budget is for the R&R category. And so as we dive into details of individual projects, you can see where the funding sources are and where district's funding is needed. So we try to, let's hold on to this. For the next 3 slides, we are going to look at the 37 projects. Can we go back to the previous slide? So the next 3 slides, we're going to really look at the 37 projects into those 3 columns. The priority projects, projects with external fundings, and the projects that come for consideration. So we can go to the next slide. Before I go into the details, I just want to walk you through how the information is presented in the chart. The table here on the left column, you will be able to find the name of each of the individual projects. The next 2 columns, you will find the total estimated total cost of the project, and then obviously the allocated funding or budget needed for 25-26. The last 4 columns, you'll find the funding sources for each of the individual projects. As we just discussed, this first set of projects, we're going to be focusing on the $79.8 billion worth of projects.
priority projects that districts need funding for. And so these total to be 15 projects, as you can see, which totals to the 21.1 million be on the second column. And then 21 million is for the 25-26 budget, the third column, sorry about that. And of this 21.1 million dollar budgets, we really looking at district funding of 17.8 million. So as Barkat mentions, most of these projects are already in progress or committed funding for, and that some of these are being funded by refinery, or we already have collected funding from the refinery, existing refinery agreements. And the rest of them are deemed as essentials for operational purposes. And I won't go into details for all of them, but if you have any questions, do feel free to ask questions. I will go through the first step, the new infrastructure set of projects. So there are a total of 6 projects, and the PV laterals the project is about to wrap up in the next few months. And there are minimal amount of money that is slated for 25-26 for invoicing and for the remaining workforce to be done in the next few months. To the next slide. Next projects that we have is the district of South Bay Park and Recreation Authority project. That is to add potential of 40 feet of recycling water usage. And that is the total amount that there is only for staff to work on and to look at planning. That project is adding about 5,000 feet of 6-inch pipeline there. That is totally to be on the trying developer. The next project is the South Bay I-405. This is the Caltrans. We looking at improving the 405 auxiliary lane. And unfortunately, this project will need to be fully funded by the district. And the following 2 projects, those are the Army Corps funded projects with a total project cost about roughly $6 million. But what you see here is the 25% district allocation project cost, roughly about $1.2 million there. So for 25-26, the budgeted amounts, those are for the purposes that we envision that will take place. And those fundings that we have identified with Top One, agreement with Cal Water, and Gardenia and funding from Carson. So with that, I'll stop there for any questions before I move on.
Are there any questions?
Madam Chair, just a quick question. So the I-405 auxiliary lanes project, why is it that we have to fully fund that?
We're in their easement, and then we're responsible for either move the pipe, or but I believe that they have agreed on this that we're gonna encase our pipeline, and so that's the estimated funding that we need to do that encase.
What's the timeline on that?
We've been waiting from Caltrans and keep moving, but I don't know, Barkat, do you have any update on?
Yeah, we're on hold. Caltrans asked us to be on hold for a little bit until they wrap up their design. Our design is almost wrapped up and ready to go. But we have a little bit, our design is around 90%, but we're waiting on them to wrap up their design. Then we can wrap up ours and put it out to bid. We do have an easement on their right of way. That is why we have to do it.
Where is this located?
Orlando is on,
Yeah.
all.
Sorry. Good afternoon, directors, or good morning. Okay, just to clarify, actually, we do not have an easement in their right of way. We did this work through an encroachment permit. This is on Marine and the I-405 freeway underneath there. Caltrans is doing a 405 widening project. So because of that, we are undertaking this project and protecting our asset due to their new, basically their piles that are going to be very near to our pipeline in that area. So we want to protect not only them, but ourselves as well. So that's why we're doing this work.
So if I could just recap, Director. Oh,
Well, go ahead and recap, but now that I
Yeah.
understand that better, I do have a comment.
So we have an existing pipeline that is in someone else's property. And when they need to do construction and move that pipe out of the way, it's our obligation to move that price wise. So for the benefit of using their property, we need to pay to move it when they want to change things.
I want to make sure
Can I ask
his question is
one more? And I just want
answered. It is.
For
Go
clarity,
on, Scott.
sure. And this is a recycled water pipeline?
Correct.
Very good. All right. Thank you.
Okay. I remember about 2 years ago, we had to deal with a pipeline in Caltrans right away. And we were there by easement. So when they made some improvements, we had to, I think at the end, we ended up hardening the pipeline. And that's our expenses were in their right away. If I just heard Orlando properly, the pipeline that we're talking about at Marine and Inglewood or thereabout, I forget exactly, is not in the right of way. So if we're doing it to accommodate Caltrans, Caltrans should reimburse us. Because we're not in their right of way. Therefore, it is their actions that is impacting us. And we're not there at their courtesy. We're outside of their right of way. We do not have any, or clarify, if we do not have an easement from Caltrans, we're not in their right of way, they should reimburse us.
Let's look into it, Director, and just get our ducks in a row, make sure that, that none of us misspoke here.
Orlando, did you have any clarification on that?
Yeah, we do not have an easement, and our pipeline therefore goes underneath the 405, underneath their right of way, which actually extends beyond the freeway. So when we installed this pipe, it was just into a permit. So we have an obligation to adhere to when they do construction, like Eric mentioned. We basically undertake that cost. We've actually discussed them reimbursing us, Director Alvarez, because this is part of their Measure M. But at this point, they have not agreed to do that. So it's they're telling us at this point that to have this encasement installed prior to them going in there and doing the work to make sure both assets are protected, not only us, but them.
But, so, and you may not have the answer to this.
Okay.
We're there by permit, not by easement.
Correct.
If we're there by permit, was it a permit condition that we relocate at their discretion?
I would have to look up the permit, as this pipe was installed a long time ago, but that's what their direction is. That they've told us, not only us, Director, but other utilities that are impacted by construction, is that we will undertake this work on our dime, essentially at our cost.
Let us look into the matter. I'll also refer this to our attorneys, Best and Krieger.
One.
Before we move on to the next slide, if I could just draw your attention, excuse me, to the right-hand side, the second from the right column at the bottom, that's $17.8 million. That is the same $17.8 million on the previous slide. That totals the first column. So these projects correspond to the previous slides.
President,
Yes.
I want to ask one other question real quick. So what's the status of the Mills Park and North Gardena recycled water lines? Any potential additional funding?
Yes. So we have met with the city of Gardena. My understanding is that they have pledged $100,000 for that project. We've met with Cal Water Service Company, and I believe that they pledged $450,000. And the city of Carson is considering additional funding. We believe that exceeds the total amount that we would need for that project in relation to adding the U.S. Army Corps funding and the Integrated Regional Water Management funding that we've already obtained. And with that, we would actually reduce the portion provided by Cal Water. So it's a true partnership in that sense, and we finally got there. We're going to be working on MOUs once this budget gets approved and we get the board's direction to move forward.
So you're still waiting on Carson though, right?
Carson is considering, we actually just received some very positive news. The County of Los Angeles Department of Public Works opined that a municipality could utilize Measure W funding for recycled water pipelines in certain circumstances. And that allowed the city of Gardena to pledge those funds. So now we're going to be working with the city of Carson to see if they can do something very.
Are they in the same zone for that?
So, under Measure W, you'll recall that only a portion of the funds are dedicated to those regional projects. Each municipality actually receives a significant portion of those funds that are paid by the city. So those are returned by the city. So they do a lot of storm drain projects and park projects and such like that. In this case, the city of Gardena, their public works director, recommended to the city manager that they pledge $100,000 for this.
So big picture though, is we needed to have this in the budget as you got. Still working on the partners. A lot of this would come into fruition after July 1 and those MOUs and so on and so forth.
Yes, I would say that would be formalizing this, but I would tell you that their verbal offers are kind of contingent on our willingness to move forward with the project. I've given them my word that we put in a lot of time and dedication into securing the federal funding and the state funding. And so with this kind of closes the loop. Again, we believe that we've exceeded the amount for the project. And that's why when Cal Water offered to assist, we think we could actually draw down their portion as well.
Just say thank you, because I think it's been a priority for us and we've kept it and you've kept the ball rolling. And so I'm really glad that you've continued to work with those cities and Cal Water. Thank you.
And thank you to our board of directors, because I know that several of them have reached out to those cities to help make that happen.
Yeah. Just for clarification, so on the Mills Park project, you talked about several funding sources that are coming in or additional contributions. City of Gardena and Cal Water and the Corps of Engineers. This shows 948,000. So of that 948,000, that's what we're going to be approving in the budget, but that's not what we need because we're going to get money coming in. Is that correct, Lynn? Is that a correct understanding or not?
Well, I would say, Director, that you're not necessarily second bite at the apple when we bring that project forward for design and construction. The costs associated with that time would be what they are. But that is our estimate at this stage for the total cost of that project.
So that's,
But I
that is the estimate.
want to be clear that if you go to that second to the left column for district funding without labor, you can see that those are zeroed out. As far as West Basin funds go. And you draw all the way down, and as Barkev and Eric pointed out, that totals that 17.8 from the previous page. So we believe that the federal funding, the state funding that we've already worked to obtain will get us there, and then those funding partners will help get us over that amount.
Okay, so really for purposes of the budget, don't pay attention to that first column, focus on the second to the last column, because that is the number that comes back, as you pointed out. Thank you.
Right, so with that, before we move on to the next slide, I just want to highlight the second set of the project, which is the R&R projects. And with the R&R projects, there are
I forgot, I'm sorry. I had to ask one thing. The district at South Bay, you talked about that. What is that project again? Small amount. Where is that project? The district at South Bay.
Orlando, do you know the update?
Yeah, that's in the city of Carson, Director Gray, right next to the Porsche. experience site. This particular project has changed names over the years, but it's a development that incorporates residential, retail, and some industrial, light industrial. It is, I
Carson.
believe, previous landfill location.
All right, thank you. Sorry, go on. Thank
Well,
you.
so far should have been done.
Talk about that.
Okay, go back to the R&R projects category. We have the R&R project at ECL, Hyperion, and Common Asset. Of those, there are 4 projects, and we mentioned that all of those have been moving forward and just been approved by the board. And one of them is the fire protection system. So all of this combined, you see that that's $15.7 million in the FY 25-26. So of the 17 million, we have 15.5 that have just been approved and will be ongoing in 25-26. And as Director Alvarez had asked, like how much of these have been funded or will receive funding by refineries? You see that for the TCS solids, we collected 1.7 or 1.8 million dollars from the refineries through the existing refining agreements. Any questions there?
Thank you.
Okay, so the next set of R&R projects are the capital asset R&R projects, which total to roughly about 2.8 million. Again, as Clark had mentioned, these are projects that just meet our district's capital funding, capital requirements, will include pumps, compressors, and whatnot, and their budgets for compliance purposes, as well as distributions assets. There are valves that fail out in the distribution systems that we need to replace. The last but not least, that's needed includes about roughly like $1.5 million is the other projects. These are the Donald D. Related projects. Elevators, it should be $751,000 that we discussed yesterday, as well as building facility on our piece of the floor HVAC issues that we have that we need to replace. That's $194,000. And then last but not least, IT related projects, $550,000. So all of these are included in the $17.8 million district funding.
What?
Let's move on to the next page. Next slide. We'll be focusing on the projects that have received refinery funding or will be part of the new agreement. We'll be collecting some of the fixed payment. And as you can see, that is one project for site improvement projects that is to for grading purposes, and there's some ponding issues at JMM. That's about $293,000 work there. Of the Torrance projects, the $4.5 million, we discussed 8 of the projects that PBF have approved our next steps. So we mentioned about $1.7 million that yesterday. $1.2 million PLC replacement project we have not have approval for yet, but we have discussed with PBF, and that is a much needed project because we have seen multiple failures with the PLC on the sites. And last but not least, the capital assets on includes membrane replacements. Those we have a few sets of membranes that are scheduled to be replaced at the various locations. So that total to be 5.9 million, and all these projects are fully funded by the refineries. Any questions?
Questions? None, you're going.
Last but not least, the next slide, those are the project for consideration. Again, as we know, projects don't get completed and, overnight, and we really need to look forward and to maintain our operational reliability to allow for us to meet customer and contractual obligations. These projects that have been identified for a number of years in the master plan. Also, we're coming to a point that we need to start doing the planning phase and investigation phase. These include looking at RO treatment that we have seen more and more failures in the RO treatment systems. Hyperion pump station reliability on our projects. You know that there is any pump stations, the three pumps, but if and when the new pumps station side fail, we do really need to rely on the existing or the old pump house. And there are a couple of pumps that are not in operational currently. So without that, times it has become an operational challenge for staff. And there, as part of the filters projects, currently the filter project is really focused on the under drain we have, but there are valves that are within the filters that really needs to be replaced as well. We're looking at opportunities to replace a couple of valves within those filters as those projects go on. And last but not least, our perimeter fence at ECL. Just because of the locations at ECL, we are seeing severe corrosions around the fencing. And we'll be coming to the board in the coming months to ask for directions regarding replacement or rehab of that. So with that, that's a total of $1.5 million worth of projects for the board to consider. Of that, there are some fundings that we have collected from existing refinery agreements, and 1.1 million is what we're estimating we need from district funding.
And if I may add, if you were to sum up those two columns that indicate funding from refineries and funding from others for each of these three graphs, to the question that Director Alvarez posed earlier, they would sum up to that $7.4 million in that very first table for outside funding.
Madam Chair, may I ask?
Yes.
I think two questions. So one is the Hyperion pump station. And you mentioned, so we have a couple pumps that are down or not working, or
The old pump house.
the old one, right? Just remind me how many pumps are in the old and the new that we had.
4 pumps in the old pump house, 3 new liability projects that we completed in 2018. And one of them, specifically pump 3, we had a fire. I'm not sure if you remember. So that's been a number of years. There is also a couple of pumps that are not in good operational status. And all of the pumps at the old pump house are constant speed, with the exception with pump 3 that had fire.
Sure.
So that's the only one that had VFD. But however, the pump and the motor is not operational.
And those are all the original pumps, right? Okay. So there's that. And then the other thing was the perimeter fence. So I mean, you're talking about the fence that literally goes around the whole property, right? And you said something about corrosion. What was it you said?
Corrosions.
Yep.
And if you recall, before the October harvest last year, we had to get temporary fencing to deter any trespassing. So we're still continuing fencing those sections of fencing right now. So we've been looking at options to replace and.
Yeah. And all that's again, almost it's 30 years old. There, give or take. Plus the fact that there were some security issues, right? I think with Topgolf next door. So I do believe it's the time to look at just the whole perimeter and or what we anticipate or any adjustments in our perimeter, if there were or not, right? So is that something, I mean, I know you got a budget here, but is that something, EJ? So you guys are gonna look at really exploring
Yeah.
what we would need to do and then, okay.
In the coming months.
Okay, and so, and EJ knows this, of course, so obviously when Topgolf was being built, you know, I had some concerns, and then later we found out that people have unfortunately, you know, gotten into our area. And I think that should have been addressed back then, but it didn't get addressed, you know, wherever that landed. So now we can fix it, but I think that should be a priority. Thank you.
With my presentation, unless there's other
Questions? Any other comment? All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I
Director,
just have, I guess, clarification question. So all of these projects are, his budgeted amounts are small amounts, under the amounts we estimated cost. But these are all projects that you're alleging need to be done.
It's starting the investigation phase, because like how do we, what we need to do, rehab of the RO system, we really need to start investigating and prioritize is to be, because those facilities and assets, that foresee that we will still need it in the foreseeable future, even with consideration of water, Cal. So those, we should start looking forward as part of the best management of like asset management practice. We should be looking at those.
Well, Director, I would suggest that we're not yet alleging that they need to be done, but we are alleging that we need to spend some money in order to determine whether there's a larger project that should be done. And with the dollars you see here, it really is just that very early exercise. Some of those may include condition assessments. Some of it may include feasibility analysis. And if we perform this work for that specific project, that would then tell us whether there's a whole project that would need to be designed and constructed and of course funded in the future.
For example, the bulk storage. The $16 million is almost replacing all of those tanks. And that may not really be necessary. So are we really looking at $16 million? I mean, right now you're only budgeting 22,000. I'm assuming that's for just investigation purposes.
That's part of, remember last night we.
Yeah, that was gonna say, okay.
And so at the conclusion of yesterday, like what we foresee of the conclusion of the condition assessment project, we perceive that there will be new tanks that we need to start planning and design for. So that's $22,000 is what we foresee will need to begin doing those type of.
And it might not entail a full replacement. It might entail spot repairs, and things of that nature.
I think another way to look at it, Director, is if we had to replace everything, it would cost around $16 million. But through that early analysis and determination of what needs to happen, we will determine how much needs to be replaced, what can be rehabbed, and that $16 million will be refined as we do some of these early analyses.
But at least my concern is that we're identifying 16 million. And at some point you can come back and say, well, you need 16 million, which is, if you look at all those tanks, okay, it's not going to be 16 million. So it would be nice. I would feel more comfortable having either know a real estimate and say we're going to investigate, which is the $22,000 that's there, or whatever it takes to do the investigation, and then come back with a real number, as opposed to start budgeting real numbers that may or may not come to fruition. And I appreciate the argument, budget for the worst, and then if you don't use the money, but that also drives rates, because then you have to generate revenue to meet your budget.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, Director. In fact, as you see, that number doesn't really affect this budget year. But if you recall the bar charts that I showed, those higher, like next year, that this fiscal year 26, 27 was substantially higher. That might be driven by the 16 million, which we don't necessarily know is real yet. So to your point, Director, and to the point that I made earlier about those future years are still being defined. That $45 million in fiscal year 26, 27 probably isn't that real. And you're spot on, Director, that the 16 million, until we do these early analyses, we don't really know what that is. So we don't have to carry that 16 million into the 5-year outlook. We can look at a lower cost, but we still need to project something so that we have a realistic estimate of that 5 years. And I shouldn't even say a realistic, but maybe a conservative effort, estimate over that 5 years. But once again, I would come back to this year's numbers. We're pretty tight on. We understand the costs and the funding that we need to deliver this year. When we go through this entire exercise again next year, presumably we'll have better costs for any of the projects on this list that are going to be done in that early feasibility. And that $45 million for 26, 27 will be refined based on the findings of what we do this year.
Okay, but again, the concern is you look at that 45 million in 26, 27, and then you're thinking about, well, what do I have to do in terms of rates? And it's a big expense.
Included in the 5-year total of the 16 is 11 million for the total project. But again, like I mentioned, that we will be coming back but without doing the investigative work, we would get us to a more realistic or defined costs from this project.
If I may, yeah, the condition assessment that we're proposing as part of the technical planning program is going to feed information to those. These tanks have been there for 30 years. Approximately, I want to say more than 5 have failed already. 4 we've replaced. Others have temporary tanks. And so, yes, we're hoping that we'll have more years to them, but there's something that is feeding us right now to include the 16 in the 5 years. We're hoping that there's more information will come in through the condition assessments.
I think the point you're pointing out is very valid, Director, that there's so much uncertainty in our future, not just with, the needs of this exact equipment until we get those studies performed. But even in, as I mentioned at the very beginning, if the Hyperion pump station project is going to rehabilitate that project for, say, 30 years, another 30 years of life, well, in that instance, that might make sense if that pump station is going to be used as part of LA's, project in the future. If we're not going to use that pump station for 30 years, then maybe a 30-year life rehabilitation doesn't make sense. So these uncertainties, these are the levers that we have to push and pull in order to come up with numbers to put in front of the board in order for you all to decide what to do on that during that budget process. And there's a lot of ways to.
Eric, are these more conservative estimates or what are they based on?
I would say so. President Gray, especially if you look at that $16 million one we've been talking about, as I mentioned, that is the price if we had to do everything.
That's
The
conservative.
total project cost, not necessarily just what is included in 5 years.
Yeah, but
I know, I just want to know, what is your estimate based on? Is it a conservative estimate?
it's a conservative
Yeah,
estimate,
that's the
yes.
only question, yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay. Anything else?
Thank you. So how are we going to fund everything that we just talked about? So the next slide is for the CIP funding options, the district does prioritize the PAYGO method for financing its capital improvement program. And I'll walk you through those funding options and how certain funds are prioritized on the next slide. On this slide, on page 47 of your packets, that look of the proposed consolidated budget. Here I populated the CIP dollar amounts using the $26.3 million number. That is broken out into 2 different categories for the R&R and then also for new CIP. As staff mentioned, there's two significant projects, the DCS and solids handling, both slated for the fiscal year and totaling approximately $12 million. And then I will provide a detail of the funding options in the next few slides. And what I'm going to do is if you were to look at these three rate scenarios, I'm going to use scenario number 3 as my one example through the next slides, just to kind of break down the different funding options. When you saw the bar charts previously in the CIP presentation that said district funding, I do want to point out that the two categories, or actually 3 categories, were cash reserve. So let me start from the top for the net position / PAYGO, and then for the cash reserve, and then commercial paper. Those will be the 3 rows that constitute district funding. Next slide. So on page 40, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so before we move on to that, so on slide 24, you said you populated the CIP and you projected it for all the scenarios for $26 million. So I go back then to slide 19. And in slide 19, the 26,345,000 is the total CIP budget. But on slide 19, you're saying that the district funds requirements are 17 million. So that's all we need to come up with.
Yes, and so all I did was populate here was just the CIP program, but I'll show you this one more time, just because I want to show it to you 3 times in this presentation, but it'll show that 17 million, the breakout for just what's the district funds portion is. So in this slide here, it's blank, there's no numbers in there, but that first next underneath the 26 million, you'll see it says less net operating. That will be the PAYGO number. The net position, where if we use scenario number 1 going up a little bit, you see net PAYGO, net operating margin / PAYGO is 10 point, and I'm sorry, I can't see it from there, 10.3 million, I believe it is. That number will be brought down. So that's one example of district funds. And then the next line item is grants and revenues. So that is still made up of that 26 million, but not district funding. Then the third row is cash reserves, which is our investment pool. That will be made up of district funds as well.
Back to this slide 24. So the total expenditures of district funds, now me going back to trying to find the nexus between slide 19 and slide 24, is about $9 million less.
I'm sorry.
About $9 million less than 116 million.
Right. So if you were looking at slide 19, the district funds will be that 17.8 million number. And then I am looking at that other projects for consideration total as well. Whether the board decides to adopt that 1.1 million in CIP projects, I did include it in the funding option, just so we can paint the picture on that total amount of 26.354 million. So underneath at the bottom where it says totals, it says total fiscal year 25-26 CIP budget without West Basin labor. That 26.3 million ties to the slide that I'm presenting here.
Okay.
If I could, Wendy. So as she just said, this 26 million is the total projects without funding. And you'll see that $7.4 million of outside funding come into play in these latter rows.
Yeah. But if I just wanted to know what is the total expenditures that I have to raise revenue for, wouldn't that be based on the 17.787 million?
Yes.
And on slide.
Well, that would be the minimum without those investigatory projects.
Oh. Slide 19, you got the 26.345 million. And that's the total CIP budget without labor, which is the number that is shown on total capital improvement programs on slide 24 for all cases.
That, and just so to be clear of my slide here, that is just a placeholder. It is not being used to calculate the rates or add into the actual rate calculator, the fluctuation in the rates. That number has already been established when you, and if, Desiree, if we may, can we go back up all the way to slide 7?
I'm sorry, what number?
Slide 7. And that would be on page 30 of the handout. I don't know if this vantage point will help. This is the rate scenarios, all 4 of them. If we were to not adjust the rates and just adjust the acre feet, the net capital reserve or pay-go amount is in the first column is going to be that 10.3 million. And those numbers start to change as the percentage of the rate increase changes in those 4 scenarios. But when you add the CIP number, I'm just adding the CIP capital and showing how that net pay-go number will draw down the overall obligation from the CIP budget.
If we could go back to slide 19, I think Director Alvarez, that's the slide you're
Right.
referencing. The
The site that started it all.
So, right there at the bottom, again, I want to say we've got $28 million worth of capital projects, including staff labor. Staff labor is already factored into Wendy's numbers above, so that remains the 26 that's shown there now without the staff labor. Now, $26 million is the sum of 17.8, 1.1, and 7.4, which includes the outside funding. So that is the total project cost, right? Not necessarily the funding, but the total project cost. And so Wendy is showing that total project cost in that slide that we left, because in a later slide, she will also show where that $7.4 million comes in from outside funding. And so when you subtract that off, now you're into that, really the 17.8 million in the first column plus the 1.1 million in the second column. And so that funding that really is going to come from rate increase or reserves, and she'll talk more about that, will be the sum of 17.8 and 1.1.
Which is 8.8.
Can I also add that there's an asterisk there that some of the funding has been accounted for in the reserve because it has been revenue collected from the existing refinery funding next payment. So that's why Wendy will be showing where the funding source, and that's why we need to sort of totality of the CIP.
I think in my last slide as well, Director Alvarez, if I may, it will tie out to slide 19. But I'm kind of doing an escalation to get us all there.
At my desk last night when I was trying to figure this out.
Okay, so we're going to the next slide. All right.
What is the next slide? Okay, the next slide is slide 24 or 25, excuse me. So as I mentioned, I am using the breakout. I'm breaking them out here. So this is going to be the first area for district funding using that 8% for scenario number 3 option. And so just want to give a little bit of a history for those. We use terminology here. I love acronyms, but I always want people to know what acronyms are as well. So the net operating margin, or pay-go, which is pay as you go, amount available for CIP in this scenario is 5.2 million. And again, what that is, or what that represents, is when we take the operating revenues minus them, minus the operating expenditures, we get a total amount. That total amount typically is used for CIP, capital improvement programs. So the balance of what we have, if you're looking at only scenario number 3 using that 8%, is 5.2 million. Will go of that CIP budget will be used from the pay-go. So that is the actual balance going towards CIP, if that helps. Then the next slide breaks down the next line item, or the next example of what the funding options. And so here, Staff has uncovered whether it's the refinery fixed payments, including in the 7.4 million number, which ties to that slide 19, as I stated earlier, which is outside funding resources as well. Grants and refinery fixed payments are all encompassed in this number here. So those grants are those reimbursable grants typically that we get from federal or state agencies. And then the fixed payments charges, when we refer to that, that's those refinery agreements that are earmarked or used for CIP and R&R projects. And then the other funding sources could consist of third parties, developers, and other regional partners that contribute to our CIP cost. So again, in this scenario, you see 7.5 million is allocated. It's not district funding. We don't consider that because it's outside funding sources. And it's also important to note here, and I think it was stated earlier, should this funding source not come in, those projects will not begin. We are looking at beginning projects based on the funding sources that we're showing you here in today's presentation. And then the next slide is our cash reserve. So again, this would be considered district funding. So if you added it to the first slide I showed you, it was 15.2 million plus this 3.7 million. That's when you're going to start to add up to that 18 million that we're talking about district fund or district responsibility for CIP projects. So where do these funds come from? Or when we say cash reserves, what are we talking about? That's the unrestricted funds that are in our investment pool. So in short-term investments, CDs, money market accounts, short-term bonds, this will be where we would pull that money out from. So it's not the entirety of that investment pool. This represents for this budget year, $3.7 million. And then the next slide is commercial paper. So we do have a $30 million line of commercial credit, or a line of credit that we call commercial paper. This is an unsecured loan to use to finance things like CIP. It has a maturity date typically of under a year, which means basically we would need to either refinance that paper or pay it within that maturity date or by that maturity date. So that number is 0. So we are not proposing of using commercial paper in this number 3 scenario.
If I could just punctuate these previous 4 slides. If the board were to adopt an 8% rate increase this year, then we would have $15 million available for capital. With the $7.4 million from outside funding, that would pay for some of that capital. And of course, we would, as Wendy's mentioned, we would have to still draw perhaps 3.7 down from our reserves and not use the commercial paper. And that last slide that Wendy will touch on will show those same scenarios to you for a 0% increase, a 5% increase, an 8% increase, and a 10% increase. And so just setting the stage for when we get there.
Thank you, Rick. And then in our next slide, I wanted to talk about some fund balance adjustments and kind of, I want to try to lay this out and explain it to you. When I came here in February, I think it was my first committee meeting, we were presenting the Q2 financial summary or financial results to the board, which is about 6 months into this fiscal year that we're in. And it was mentioned in that meeting, or was asked of my staff, if we were presenting a mid-year results, which is typically presented 6 months into the budget cycle after July 1st. And that we didn't have a mid-year process at that particular time. I am accustomed to giving the board, council members a mid-year process. So this is really, this slide kind of represents where in workshop number 1, we have projected for the year-end projections and where we ultimately just think we'll land financially, which is a positive net position. And if once I have my audit and the books are finalized and I come back to the board in December or I should say my books will be finalized in December, I can return back to the board in January, giving you that mid-year result. But I wanted to propose for this budget cycle some of the assumptions where we think we'll land for this fiscal year. And with that positive net position, what we can also do with those numbers. And so I think it's relative to the CIP budget because it may feel like we're depleting all of our reserves and bringing our balance down to zero just by looking at CIP and looking at the 25-26 proposal. But I also wanted to bring a little bit of 24-25 into this conversation so we can look at the fullness of it. But again, this is just a proposal for now. December 31st, I'll have those true up numbers and I'll be able to present the mid-year result. And then we can look back at the fiscal year 25-26 one more time. And let's say the number is positive, we can make decisions based on that positive net position. And if it's at a deficit, we make decisions based on that deficit net position as well. So with that said, I just want to go over.
Wendy, one
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so on slide 29 here.
Yeah.
You kept referring to, is this a mid-year number?
This is,
It's gonna be a final year number.
I'm sorry.
Is this a mid-year number? You kept referring to mid-year.
Yes,
Is this a mid-year number?
not for 24, not for 23-24, which would be that true up number. What I'm proposing is bringing to you a mid-year number once I get the final number for fiscal year 24-25. So the mid-year would occur January of 2026.
And that would use the final number for 25 that would come in like October. Certainty there.
I'm sorry.
And that would include your mid-year adjustment for 25-26 will include the auditor's
Yes.
reconciliation of the fiscal year 25. So you'll have an exact number associated with any carryover from 25.
So on June 30th of 2025, we come to the close of the fiscal year.
Right.
Thereafter, we have an audit process to close our books. My audit is dated for October of 2025. Once the auditors finish looking at all of our actual revenues, actual results, taking all the pluses and minuses, depreciations, capitalization, all the different varying numbers, they create our ACFR. And I know the ACFR has been presented to the board each and every time, but what I haven't seen, and I'm not for certain, because I didn't go back years, but I know this year it was questioned, where's the mid-year results for the previous year, which we did not have. We gave you a Q2 result. What I'm proposing is once I get all my audit done and that number trued up, I bring not just the ACFR back, but the following month in January, I also bring a mid-year review. And the mid-year review is of 25-26 budget, but using where we ended for 24-25 fiscal year. If that makes sense.
And I would add that
So, but back to this slide 24 or 29. So in slide 29, the $12 million is the estimated net balance adjustment estimated that you'll use for the end of 24-25.
Yes, let me say it this way. For slide 29, what I'm identifying is a couple of key areas that I see we will have a surplus that will make up our surplus. I am estimating at this point a potential adjustment of $12 million. $4 million of that is from an agreement from Cal Water. If that number, for some reason, that dollar amount is not added to my revenues for 24-25, it will still impact my 25-26 overall number. It'll either land in 24-25 and be counted by the auditors, or it'll land in 25-26 and we'll realize it as actual revenues that we're not counting in this year's budget proposal.
Okay. So back to the one question, just for right now, we're assuming certain things.
Yes.
The assumption is that we will end the 24-25 fiscal year with an estimated balance excess numbers, and then we're projected of $12 million
Yes.
estimated.
Yes, I would say, because I don't know where that Cal Water number is going to land, yes, between $8 million, $12 million.
Good, thanks.
Okay, go on, Wendy.
Thank you. So I just want to highlight real quick some of the assumptions. So that as we kind of just seen, the contributing factors I mentioned was Cal Water, but also that increase in potable water sales. That primarily is going to come because we did budget for 80,000 acre feet, and we're seeing this year, and I'll be coming to committee on Tuesday where our Q3 potable water sales are coming in, and they are coming in higher. Also, another contributing factor was in fiscal year 24-25, the year we're in now, there was a more conservative budget approach to revenues, to expenditures. So that is also showing some of those more favorable numbers and ending this budget cycle. And then also there was a big expenditure for election fees, which we didn't have to conduct that election. So there's a savings that comes from election fees as well. And then there was a dollar amount of about $4.4 million in grant revenue that we recently received, but did not budget for. So that is another contribution to how we're landing in that $12 million range. Okay. And as I mentioned before, I will come back and we'll true up those numbers and give you more of a concrete presentation. So the next slide. And with every positive, there's also some challenges and opportunities. So for fiscal year 25-26, even in workshop 1, we talked to you about some of the challenges and opportunities. And I just want to, in my time here, just go over a couple of things that I was able to glean and pull out, and just want to also have this open conversation with the board. So as we're aware, 2 fiscal years in a row, there was a negative net position for fiscal year 22-23, and then 23-24, or shortfall or deficit, where revenues came in lower than projected, and expenditures, although they came in lower than projected, there was still a negative net position. And so with 2 consecutive years, and I would like to say this wasn't just unique to, West Basin, this was unique to all municipalities. We're sitting outside of those COVID years, their numbers, their revenue numbers declining for just different matters of, and I kind of list the different issues, like with inflation or low consumer confidence and low consumer spending, some job loss that was suffered. So all of that translates into inflation. Some other areas that will.
I apologize, real
Yes.
quick. I'm going to summarize that real quick. We've been reducing our reserves. So when she so eloquently said that in accounting speak, what I hear is we've been pulling from our reserves over those 2 fiscal years, which you don't want to do consistently. And so that is one of the challenges, and you'll see the opposite in the opportunities.
The opportunity this year, we're gonna add 12 million.
Yes, but and I think that's a very positive story, but when you look at, again, how you did that, the $4 million from Cal Water Service Company, we've been actually expending those funds over the past 2 years so it's a constant long game, but that's the need to replenish
We
those.
spent the funds from reserves, and now we are getting the funds, and we can replenish the reserves.
Exactly.
Took the words right out of my mouth. So another, the standby charge, we had talked about that for time and time about that sunsetting and expiring in 2030. So we're looking at ways of replacing that revenue stream. This, again, just focusing on right now for the challenges. I mentioned inflation. There's a federal target of 2% for inflation. So basically inflation has not increased, but it's slightly decreased from that 3%. So we're still seeing impacts on the cost of goods, the cost of services, based on some of these challenges that I mentioned in the first set. But there are opportunities as well, without resorting to the use of commercial paper, which is on the bottom. And part of that is coming from the previous slide, that $12 million, what to do with it. And so creating or replenishing the cash reserves, which Director Alvarez just spoke to, based on those deficit periods and building up our healthy reserves, that it was there for us when we needed it during the shortfall. So we should look at replenishing it when we have more of a surplus. And then also building the CIP reserve, which is what the meeting is about today, so that we are looking into those future CIP 5-year rollout years and building a dedicated restricted fund for just CIP. So again, these are showing you the challenges and the opportunity. I think the discussion will be had later when I'm able to bring back to the board the actual trued up fiscal year 24-25 numbers and then make a determination of what position we want to put the district in at that time. And with that said, the next slide, going back to that proposed consolidated budget view. This now, I populated all of those different funding options in each different rate scenario. And so you will be able to see again that $26 million CIP budget. And then a few things for consideration in the columns are utilization of that PAYGO net position for financing CIP in the 4 different scenarios, the external contributions, and incorporating funds from grants and refineries is the next line. And then finally, the strategic use of cash reserve to meet those funding needs, but also we're in a position, or we're projected to be in a position to replenish those cash reserves. So I do realize that I'm utilizing cash reserves in the first scenario, but I do believe with the other previous 2 slides that there's an opportunity to replenish those cash reserves. And if using just the first 2 rate scenarios, those would bring us into that commercial paper use as well. And with that, again, the same proposal, if needed, there is consideration to replenish or to pay off that commercial paper. And there is, the reason why this is proposed is there's cash flow. So we don't get everything in at one time. So we're not necessarily able to pay for everything at one time. So this is why we would strategically use reserves or commercial paper in those first 2 scenarios. But as you can see in the latter 2 scenarios, the commercial paper is not an option.
Can you talk a little bit more? For commercial paper, I think earlier you mentioned that it has to be refinanced every year.
If we were to take out a commercial paper loan, so the commercial paper every year has to be, I guess, restated that we are interested in using commercial paper. So somewhere around August, we'll come to the board with that staff report, but not refinanced. It is a variable rate, so it falls in line with the market rate. But if we were, what I was mentioning earlier, if we use commercial paper, there is a maturity date. So if we pull out X number of commercial paper dollars and it's 270 days till maturity, we have 270 days to pay that off, unless I talk to the investment managers and they find a way to refinance that money if we needed to do so.
So we have to, just using the scenario where you have 3 million in commercial paper. The commercial paper you borrow, let's say it's 360 days. At the end of the 360 days, you either have to pay it back.
Yes.
Or you have to re-extend it with whatever bank, and they'll say, that's fine. Interest rate now, instead of being 3.6%, maybe 3.5% for the next 360 days. But at some point, unless we pay it off, we're going to have to roll that into long-term debt.
Correct.
So commercial paper is just short-term financing, but if we take advantage of it, there is a higher potential that it just becomes long-term debt.
It would still be considered a short-term debt instrument, the same way that I was stating we use our cash reserves in their short-term debt instruments, but we would add it into our debt reserve payment, yes.
So it is short-term, you can keep refinancing it or rescheduling for another, whatever the period is, 360 days I use. But at some point, it is debt that would have, so my point is that we need to really recognize that if we borrow money in the short term, or we may be able to just draw down on reserves, and we probably can do a scenario 1 and 2 here at 0 and 5%, where we still draw down in reserve. You don't incur that debt. And I would just like to see that.
The reason why I use the 2 commercial paper options, as I stated, we have other obligations that we also have to pay. So it's about balancing the cash flow and the availability of cash to make those payments. So if I draw completely down in this first scenario, $8 million, almost $8.6 million from just reserves, I may still have a cash flow problem that will draw me to commercial paper regardless.
Maybe you can come back with a cash flow analysis, but if we do show that, be interesting to just see that scenario. Instead of using short-term debt, just financing it out of reserves. As we did in the 23, 24, and 22, 23, and now we're replenishing that.
Well, Director, you're absolutely right. Like, that is a scenario that we could look at, is that instead of using commercial for these first two scenarios, we just take it all from reserves. But because of those previous 2 years that we drew down reserves, our reserves are pretty low now. And I think what Wendy's suggesting is another $8 million from the value of our unrestricted reserves today can put us into pretty low numbers.
We haven't looked at reserves yet, but remember, we are gonna end up with about $12 million.
Caution the board that those numbers aren't finalized yet. We're
And I
not
said
budgeting
that
those numbers
estimated,
yet.
and I kept saying the estimated, but it will be more in that ballpark than in the $2 million ballpark.
We believe so.
And the reason why I talk about cash flows, because that estimation, it will take 6 months to actually count in what we will receive during 6 months of the new fiscal year and what we'll be obligated to pay. Taking out, the reason why I put commercial paper in there is to be more conservative and cautious of cash flow.
I would suggest that not just this year, but in future years, one thing we are trying to establish, both from last year's rate increase and what the board's going to consider this year, is really on Wendy's previous slide, rebuilding reserves and starting a CIP fund. Currently, as you've seen through this entire presentation, our pay-go amounts available for CIP are really just what's left over on our annual basis. And what we'd like to do is start having a sufficient revenue at the end of the year where we can actually put aside money, not just to spend this year for CIP, but to start building an account that we can draw upon, to have some money in the savings account, so to speak, that we can use specifically for CIP, and not just rely on every budget year and have to fund and have to figure out the funding each year. And that's going to take time. It won't be done in 1 year. It won't be done in 2 or 3. But with the potential mid-year adjustments that we're suggesting, that would really give us an opportunity, depending on the scenario that the board adopts, to start putting aside some money and thinking about not just building the reserves again and building a CIP fund, but also in 2030 when that standby charge drops off. So even though we focused on the CIP today, there's a lot more for this board to consider in the future and from this meeting beyond just the CIP.
Okay. Where are we?
Any more, for me, are there any more questions on this slide here?
Danny, you want to go on?
If not, I'll hand it back over to our general manager.
The next slide. We just wanted to touch on the next steps. We've already discussed the schedule. We do have a June 5th customer workshop, customer and stakeholder, and then a June 6th workshop number 4. We'll be sending out an email today with several documents. It's going to be a link to several documents. We believe that we've received a lot of questions over the first 2 workshops, and then of course today. What we're trying to do is populate that file folder for you with most of the documents and questions that you've asked. I'm happy to meet with you individually one-on-one to walk you through any of those specifics, but you'll see that there'll be quite a few things in there. We hope to reconcile all of those during the June 6th workshop. So I'll use this as one example. We talked about the sponsorships and some of the memberships. In that we'll be representing that. We'll get the feel from the board, and then based off of that, we'll be able to move forward and kind of answer or reconcile that question or issue. But if in the coming weeks, if there are questions that you've asked, and of course, Director Alvarez just talked about the use of commercial paper and such, we'll be bringing that all back to you to present those options with a recommendation. You can see that in this presentation, we focused in on scenario 3, which is a 8% increase. There are several reasons for that. One was the desire to avoid using commercial paper, if at all possible. Secondly, I know that a couple of months ago, I believe maybe a month and a half ago, I notified the board of directors that Moody's had lowered our credit rating. This was done in part to fluctuation in water sales, but also just the increased cost of living and increased cost of doing business. When we talk about our reserves, and we've really pulled down those reserves for 2 years in a row. And so as Director Alvarez is pointing out, that this is a year where we could replenish those reserves. But don't forget that dollar for dollar, it's not the same as it was a handful of years ago when we weren't pulling that out. So when they look at cash on hand and how many days we could operate with that, it's not the same as it was a few years back. So replenishing those reserves is crucial, especially when you consider the fact that, and we didn't get into the projects and such because we know that some of them are uncertain, but we know we're going to have CIP next year, and we know that we need to determine what to do with our building and our headquarters. So we do have significant costs on the horizon, and that's why avoiding additional debt at this time may be something to consider. And so at that June 6th, if there's anything that any individual director would like to discuss, you can please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email, and we can make sure that we're ready to address that. If questions arise at that workshop and we need to, again, have another one, we're more than capable of putting something together. And again, our hope is to adopt a budget by our deadline by the end of June, but potentially at our regularly scheduled June board meeting. Next slide. And that concludes today's presentation.
Director.
I have a couple things real quick, and I do want to ask, and I don't know where my colleagues are, but on June 6th, I know we've scheduled it for 10:30. I can tell you I now have a conflict, but only a layered conflict, so I'd be a little late, but I'm just wondering if we were able to push it to 11:30 or 12 on that day at all. If not, you'll have to proceed without me, but are you guys available? On the 6th, Friday the 6th, instead of doing 10:30 in the morning, can you do a little bit later as a start time?
I may have a conflict too. I don't know. I have to talk to Desiree because something came up. I have to look at my calendar too.
I would have a conflict, but if we want to shift it to the afternoon and do it at 3, I could do that.
I could do the afternoon. I've got to be in the area in the afternoon by 4 anyway, so if you start at 3, I can't probably stay the whole time.
I can start as early as 2.
All right, so you have why don't you just write it down? Direct Alvarez can do 2. You can do 2.
I could do 2.
Tommy, and then I'll have to check and let you know about me too.
I'm
Director
free,
Deere.
I'm free anytime.
So would you call me and I'll check my calendar? I know something.
Okay, so
Yeah.
great. That's one thing down. Let me ask just really a couple quick questions. One was, and I know you used those 8% scenarios, and then you did mention that, EJ. So I guess in the big scheme of things, if you do the 0%, are you saying that we would not be able to replenish our reserves at all, or nearly the level? Because the calculation here is the 8%.
So if you go to that 0%, if you want to go back to that slide. And I'll let Wendy walk you through it because I think she'll.
So I think your question is, where are we looking at where are the funds coming to replenish the reserve or to create a CIP reserve account or a fund account? That primarily would be coming from the results of the fiscal year ending this year. Where our net position is, if it's at $12 million, which is what I stated in the previous slide, 29, then that's where that replenishing, paying off commercial paper, all those different opportunities would come.
I do think in another round of this, I really would just love to see, I like the breakout you did for the 8%, and I'd like to see, one for all the options you're giving, just so we can just see it right in front
More
of
of
us.
a clear
I know
picture.
that was an example, but, so that'd be one. And then remind me, how much did we do our rate increase last year? Does any,
10%.
10, right? Okay. And, Metropolitan obviously is in the midst of their budget. So does anybody have any ideas as to where Metropolitan is gonna be yet when it
Yeah.
comes to pass through to us?
Metropolitan Water District is actually not in the process of adopting a budget. They adopted a 2-year budget. However, they staggered their rate increase. And so, yes.
It'll be 11% on January 1st.
Thank you, 11%.
And that's typical. I mean,
11%.
Not the amount, but the time of the year, the net rate goes into effect January to December. Our budget is July to June.
So obviously, everything you're laying out accounts for that, right? So then, on the other hand, you all will be looking at the budget next year, right? The next year for the 2 years. So we're doing what we're doing now, then there's that overlap. That we'll have to anticipate where they might go. Okay. Okay, last but not least, and I do think at the next workshop, I'd love to still see, I want a better understanding of where the reserves are going to be in all of these. I mean, I think we
Right.
need to understand where, what kind of cash we're gonna have in reserves. So I just like to see that really laid out.
And may I just add to that, how it impacts our rating?
Well, that's okay. And the other thing too is June 5, the day before, you obviously have customer workshops, so you should maybe have some feedback from some of our agencies where their thinking is. I don't know how you, at some point, articulate that to us. But obviously, we'd like to understand what they're thinking as we do these scenarios.
We'll definitely collect their feedback, and I'll do a round of outreach as well.
That's all I have at this moment. Thank you.
Director? Any
So
comment?
I do have comments. One is, Director Houston's brought up a very key point. And that is, we're looking at an 8% increase. That's just on our charge. On top of that, we're gonna have to pass through the rate increase that will become effective for Metropolitan on January 1st. And that only impacts this budget year, 25, 26. Will not impact 26, 27. But so the Met, until Met does their next biennial, which won't be till next year. So what will be the net total increase once we add our increase and Met in January? Because that's part of what we're adopting here. We are gonna pass through whatever the Met is.
So the rate fluctuation for Met was added in workshop number 2. So I did propose for where we are right now. And then starting January through the end of June 2026, I did up that rate with that increase that Met already has in that 11%. So I already included that, and that is reflected in what we've been presenting to you.
I'm then looking at just back to slide 31. If we're looking at that, isn't that total revenues based on just the water sale on our and expenses does not include? I don't see the Met in here.
The actual pass through, no, that I did not.
So this is just our rate increase affecting our rates. We'll still need to do the pass-through format at some point. I think last year when we adopted a 10% rate increase, was a little bit of a shock. And all for the good. At the end of the day, we generated more cash, et cetera. We were very conservative, and I think it was a very wise idea to not overestimate water sales, but try to be more targeted to the water sales. And if anything, you sell a little bit more water, you wouldn't be in the situation that is, where the revenues are substantially less than, program because their water sales are consistently lower than what they project. So I think that's all good, but in terms of percentages, I think that 10%, 8%, on the subsequent year is a little high. I think we should target more of a 5%. And we are gonna revisit some of the expenditures based on some previous comments, so the expenditures may not be as reflected here right now. If we can look at that so that we can live with a 5%. I think that's more of what I would think would be more prudent action on our part. Earlier, I was surprised to see that the cost of living is only 2.8%. Every time I turn around, it seems like everything's going up more than that. But if that's the CIP, at 5%, we're almost over twice as much as the CIP. And we do need to keep cognizant that we do have just some issues in terms of the folks that this ultimately passes down to. And affordability for some of our constituents is a big issue. So we need to keep affordability in mind. And with that, I think 5% might be a more prudent target than 8%. Those are my comments.
Undirected provide any comment?
No,
Any
no
request?
comments.
Director Deere,
Yes.
any request?
No.
Of the next meeting, all right. Please bring back the scenario, I think, Director Alvarez suggested 5%, but we should look at all of them, 5, 8, 10, whatever, to reflect our reserve and our CIP budget, as well as our rating. I think that's gonna be important. To make sure we hold certain affordability we're concerned about. The areas where affordability is very important, but we need to make sure that the agency is whole too. So, but with that, I thank all of you for your presentations today. Very thorough, and I look forward to the next workshop. We will figure out timing and the date that needs to be different, and any other last thing.
No, I just want to say thank you to staff, not just in person. We have a lot of people online joining us too. So I want to thank everybody.
Thank you,
for joining us.
thank you those online. I forget about that. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair. Sorry, before we get off of this, I just wanted to add one other comment as well, because I totally understand Director Alvarez's comments, and I echo them. And right now, I'm just maintaining a very open mind, and I like the scenarios you're presenting. I'm not pegging on anything. That's why I want to see some of those numbers we asked for, and I want to hear what the customer agency feedback was as well. So, but right now, I'm just a really open mind, but I want to look at, the wholeness of this district, depending on where we go in this budget. Like those reserves and sort of things are concerns for me. So again, I understand and kind of like what Director Alvarez is saying, but we need to see some more data on these to be informed. Thank you.
And if, as Director Houston suggested, if we can get information on what other agencies may be looking at, as well as making sure we incorporate Met's rates, that is part of the presentation also, consideration. Anything else, guys? Anything else?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. And with that, any future agenda items or any other director's comments? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.